Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dylan Stiles, and I'm your host of Queer in the Air, a queer political podcast to talk about the intersection of queerness and politics in Australia. Today, we would like to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Bunurong and the Woiwurrung people of the Kulin and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'm very excited to have Rochelle, who is the Vice President of Liberal Pride in Victoria, and is actually connecting with us from overseas. So thank you, Rochelle, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Dylan. It's a really good opportunity to be here. It's been an interesting podcast series to just listen to other people's views and journeys.
Well, I want to deep dive and get into your political journey and your political life. So I'm going to hit you with the same questions I ask all of our participants. And the first one is, Rochelle, can you introduce yourself, a little bit about your story, your journey, and to being the proud queer person you are today, and in particular in politics?
So for much of my journey, I've been closeted. And so I came up through, my parents were Liberal Party supporters, and I followed in that step. And it's very much always a philosophy I've embraced, because about individuality. Now, I grew up in the 70s in a very different environment to what we have nowadays. I think in my year 12, homosexuality was finally legalised in my home state. And of course, was still illegal in Tasmania throughout my university time. It's so the perspective is fairly different. I was aware of my difference from a very early age, and it just continued. The dysphoria continued to grow through my life. But I'm married. I have 2 children, and so pretty much from my early 40s through to my turning 50 was my time of finding my gender identity, embracing it, and ultimately affirming it publicly. And I was heavily involved in politics at university. I actually ran for Melbourne Uni president. It was then I was at a residential college, so I was on the residential college ticket. But I was also involved in the Liberal Club at that time. So a lot of my politics at that stage was more with the people I was associated with. So I was going through with people like Tony Smith, Sophie Mirabella, Richard Marles. So it was a fairly interesting time to be at Melbourne University. I never went on with politics, probably for 2 reasons. One was that I was too busy. I was a law commerce student, and I was heavily involved on the corporate side of life, and that just consumed me. But I also knew there was a side of me that I didn't want to share with the world, and which could be devastating if found out. So it was inconsistent. I was cross-dressing in secret at that stage, and you didn't want to be the person on the front page. But largely it was because I was too busy pursuing a career. Actually, once I've come out, I've become far more involved in politics once again, which was joining up with Liberal Pride and actually re-engaging in some of the women's section within the Liberal Party as well. And also, of course, the other pride groups.
Incredible. And I find that a really interesting story, that once you affirmed who you were, that was the point where you now my access into politics can be authentic, real, and honest. And I think that that's something which I think probably a lot of the listeners will probably engage with as well. And as you've said in previous conversations, people have outlined that they entered politics as a queer person, so they haven't known otherwise. And I think from your experiences there, you entered at a young level, and then you've come back once you feel affirmed, and now you are, taking an active role within the party, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier when you're authentic. Your heart has to go out. Like we all get very excited with Bob Brown being the first gay politician, but you really got to add the word openly. We all know that there were people there before him.
I would completely agree. And I think it's actually one of the reasons to why this podcast was established was there are people across the political spectrum
Yes.
who people may know, identify, or whatever, but they are not publicly out. So I think it is that conversation as well around how do we make those people who are in parties, in elected positions, feel comfortable to be themselves authentically and completely.
Yep.
My next question for you, because I think your story and your perspective is really interesting. I'm wondering if there is someone who, or multiple people, who you look up to as role models or mentors who may have helped you on your journey. It can be in politics or out of politics, or that nice intersection.
I don't really have never really had a mentor. I have a lot of people I admire. Two of the slightly offbeat ones that I'll mention would be Janet Rice. I do acknowledge the role that she has done, and Louise Pratt. Now, one of the reasons I really admire Louise is the struggle that she's had within the party and making change within the party there, and the fact that she actually suffered for her queerness and got bumped down the Senate ticket is a fairly impressive story. And she was going out with it. Those two were very important to me because they both had trans partners at a time in my life when I didn't think that it was ever possible. Of more recent times, I look at the people who crossed the floor or who have agitated within the Liberal Party and brought about real change. And of course, Warren Entsch. Those people who, I think we both know that the public battles and the elections between the parties is a small part of what politics is about. I think the battle within parties is actually far more important. And those people who have fought those battles really need to be acknowledged. And I think those who have had the courage of their convictions to do things like crossing the floor is just extraordinary. I know that's probably something that is totally foreign concept outside of the Liberal Party because the consequences are so huge, but they will suffer for what they did. And that's regrettable, but admirable.
Can I just go on a little bit about that? How did it make you feel to see that there was Liberal people who were backing the values, I guess, and crossing the floor on policy which may have been harmful, hurtful, or, of a concern to yourself as, I guess, a trans woman in particular?
I was not surprised that there were people backing us. The people who don't back us are a vast minority within the party. The fact that they pushed it as hard as they could and as far as they went, I was terribly uplifted by that. I think that from my experience within the party, there are few people who have a problem. And unfortunately, the media focuses on them. But the vast majority of people are at worst ambivalent, or they're ambivalent and curious, or be very, very supportive. But to actually see them cross the floor and to have spoken out against the party, wasn't really party position, but the party legislation, it was pretty uplifting. Yeah, it's very easy to see the negatives, but those sort of positions are very affirming.
I can completely understand that. I think on the opposite, I was really concerned to where my party's direction was going, with kind of looking at potentially getting it through and seeing it go to the Senate and then seeing what happened then. I think there was people I know within my own political spectrum who said that, they don't feel their party is the voice of them at this current moment in time.
A lot of queer people like to point the finger at the Liberals. I think all parties have problematic people. But of course, ALP, Greens are far more disciplined. But I mean, the thing that always occurs to me is I think one of the most horrendous anti-trans politician in Australia at the moment is Mark Layton. And we were one handshake away from having him as Prime Minister.
Mm.
But that also is reflective of the internal battle that has occurred within the ALP party. Those sort of attitudes, I don't think, they probably do exist, but people keep them under the lid now.
I think, I think this conversation just opened that, there's definitely faults on all sides of the political spectrum when it comes to the increasing support, participation, engagement, and recognition of LGBTI people.
Possibly not the Animal Justice Party.
Possibly not. They do have a fantastic member of parliament in Andy Medic, who is an active advocate in this space.
Oh, yeah.
So we will give them the recognition they deserve.
That's right.
I'm intrigued. So we've talked about, some of the complexities within the party in kind of this space. I want to know from yourself, what are the barriers that you see to the participation of queer people involved in politics? And how do you think that we, as, I guess, politically or politics more broadly, and then maybe Liberal Pride / the Liberal Party, and increasing the participation of queer people and hopefully getting them elected to government?
I think one of the bigger barriers for queer people is they're often marginalised. So to get into Parliament, you need resources. So you have that fundamental threshold of how do you have sufficient resources to actually make a run. I think then you also have your internal barriers. Am I good enough? Am I worthy of being elected? All of those sort of things. Is there barriers within the Liberal Party? Yes, but that's because it's a very competitive business to get elected into any position. I actually think the barriers within the Liberal Party are lower than some of the others, because if normal pre-selection procedures are followed, all you need is a lot of friends. Actually, that's the same for all parties. So if you can break through those two first barriers, then it's just a matter of getting organised and having sufficient friends. But I think the rainbow groups within all parties are really important, because for everyone, it's a battle. I take my hat off to those early people who have gone through and been pre-selected because they were doing it on their own. Now, I think in Parliament now we have about 11 queer people. So at least there's some people there who have some familiarity. But must have been a lonely walk for Bob Brown. Back on barriers. I think we're all fighting against some degree of prejudice within our parties. But I think it's all about getting people winning arguments. The fact that, we have got those 11 people in Parliament is indicative that those barriers are slowly being broken down. I think basically, and that other barrier is our internal one. Can we push through can we actually have faith that we are worthy? Because the queer community is a wonderfully creative community with good ideas, and they deserve to be heard. Most queer people have a lot of friends. It should be an advantage.
I would hope so. I think we're all pretty lovely. I guess I'm curious in particular, the last little component of that question is, how do we see more LGBTI people get elected in all levels of government, so local, state and federal? I know that the president of Liberal Pride ran for local council at the last election, and I think that standing is number one. But
yes,
what is, I guess, Liberal Pride or the Liberal Party doing to kind of help get more LGBTI people elected?
Look, from Liberal Pride, and remember, it's the Victorian Liberal Pride group, so there are groups in other parties. It's the fastest growing branch within Victoria. So there are a number of people coming in. There's, I'll take the point that was raised by one of your other guests that they're largely cis white males, but we do have some lesbians, and we do have about 4 or 5 gender diverse people.
So I think part of what we've got to do is get the message out that you're welcome and that you should participate if you believe in the fun.
You should come along and get participate, because that's the only way that change will occur, is by actually getting involved. And the ideas we have are entirely valid, and we need to get more people involved. Liberal Party, as you know, is never going to endorse quotas or those forms of mechanisms, but we've shown you we don't need it. But I think the rainbow groups are very important to give support and to, bring people along on the journey. The other thing, of course, that Liberal Pride gets involved in is fundraising for candidates. And we both know that that's fairly critical.
Well, I think you're 100% there. I think also your rainbow networks normally are where your friends start. And as we said, to get elected, you need a lot of friends.
A lot of friends.
So, yeah, I'm with you.
And the other thing that we have done is, informally help people out with pre-selection, preparation, all of those sort of things.
Amazing.
We're in a political process.
Incredible. And Rochelle, I want to ask you, what advice would you give to a queer person who's looking at entering into politics? What's your broad brush advice?
Think very carefully about whether you're willing to take on the toll. I think anyone going into politics needs to think fairly carefully about that. I think it's incredible how ex-politicians look so happy after about 2 years being out of the game, but they've normally got very useful. But the best advice, I think, is do it. Get involved, because don't be put off by what you believe people's perceptions are, because it's a lot easier when you're involved. People can't hate being rude to your face. So, yeah, you do have some interesting interactions with people who publicly, are not believed to be that supportive, but face to face, they have to accept you. So visibility is key. Get involved on a small scale or run. And there are people out there who will support you, not just from within your party. You will get informal support from outside the party. We need to get more queer people involved in politics, not just in Parliament, but involved.
100%. And yeah, I'm with you. 100%.
Who would have thought it?
Crazy. And thank you so much. I guess that kind of wraps up, the political aspect of the podcast. And thank you so much for your perspective. I think I myself came with some preconceived ideas potentially of how you may engage as someone not within my kind of political sphere. And everyone will take quite a bit out of this podcast and this episode because I have myself. So thank you so much for opening my eyes a little bit further within, how the Liberal Party works for LGBTI people. And it's great to see that there is gender diverse trans women, lesbians, and gay men across the Liberal Party, in particular Victoria. So that is fantastic.
And it's been interesting the number of guest speakers we've had, ministers, all the way through to the cabinet level of people who are proud to be associated with the Rainbow Group.
Rochelle, I've got a fun question for you. I'm not sure if you're into pop culture, but I am, so I'm asking it anyway. So, Rochelle, who is your favourite queer character in a TV show or movie, and why?
I just thought of another one. I think we're all so influenced by pop culture that it's really important to do. And I've got a few. Dill from The Crying Game. I found that very influential in terms of, actually probably in a negative way, that was the perspective of what awaited someone who transitioned. Then in 2017, where I was coming up to publicly affirming my identity, there was the, I think, Chilean movie, A Fantastic Woman. And in that marina is just a wonderful presentation of how you if you have faith in yourself and you are comfortable in yourself, you can push through fairly horrific circumstances and come out and be fantastic. And the other one that popped into my head, because I just love it, that was Pose. And, throw a blanket over the entire cast. It was just such a wonderful movie. Pretty confronting, but loved it.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your contribution. I will ask you, is there any final things you'd like to say? And then we're going to wrap it up.
I think the thing everyone would want people to take away with is get involved. It's pointless ranting at some of the transphobes or the homophobes that are in politics. You can make real change by becoming a member of a political party and pushing through and making sure people see you and see that you're active. Nothing changes the politics faster than that.
Well, thank you so much, Rochelle, and thank you for your beautiful closing words.
And thanks for the podcast.
No worries.
It's interesting. It's really interesting.
This is the closing of season 1. You were our final speaker, introducing people across the political spectrum. So thank you. We are coming back for season 2, and season 2 will be interviewing all of our queer identifying candidates who are running for Victorian Parliament across the political spectrum. I'm looking forward to hustling all those people to come and partake because queer representation, queer voices are at the most, integral time is now.
Yeah.
So let's get them elected. And I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our listeners. This is the close of season 1. Season 2 will be coming soon. Keep your eyes out on our socials. We are on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And thank you, everyone. Good night.